Nurses of psych wards, what did a patient do that left you speechless? One of our patients escaped the ward and managed to hitchhike all the way to Sydney, about 900 kilometers. I watched a guy try to remove rats from his rectum. Stated that his ex-girlfriend summoned them there. He ended up tearing his rectal walls to shreds. A nurse told me one of her patients killed himself on the unit while on 1-1 suicide watch. We had a geropsych floor. Crazy old people. One night while passing through, a little old lady popped her head out her doorway and said to me, "I could sure use the company of a good-looking young man tonight." "Sorry, I'm not that good-looking." Quick as snot on a doorknob, she said, "That's okay, I can't see too well." I didn't join her, but her charisma was on point. My sister was actually sectioned earlier this year for her eating disorder. She shouldn't have been, but that's a story for another time. And she was right next to the PICU, psychiatric intensive care unit. One of the nights she heard multiple screams coming specifically from that ward. One of the patients had bit a chunk out of a nurse's leg. As they were trying to detain them, they then started eating said chunk. It's crazy to think these types of things happen. Edit, sorry guys, I typed psychiatric instead of pediatric. She was only 15, so it was PICU. I just had a bit of a brain confusion. Probably the saddest was a resident I had a long time ago. This gentleman was a WW2 vet with Alzheimer's and dementia. Probably once or twice a month he would relive some battle he was in. He would literally run up the hallway and grab you and yell at you to get down behind the sandbags. He would then tell you take his Thompson because it was too heavy for him. He would just use his pistol. Then he would get up and run back down the hallway. This guy was old, and seeing him run full sprint like that up and down the hallway during one of his episodes was surreal. I can't imagine having to constantly relive the worst moments of your life where you witnessed and survived the unspeakable horrors of war. Not a nurse, but I used to be a security guard in a hospital, and we had a patient who self-harmed and cut a hole into themselves around their belly button and then stuck a bunch of paper clips and buttons and things like that into it. Not a nurse, but I was a patient in a psych ward. The ward was sectioned into two sides based on case severity. I was on the less severe side. One night, an incredibly tall, somewhat muscular man escaped his room on the severe side, got through a door that was supposed to be locked, got into the less severe side, and into my room. I woke up, sat up, and saw him standing in my doorway. He asked in a shaky voice if I was all right. I hesitantly said yes, to which he responded by getting a look of terrified horror and screamed, "I knew it. You can see them too. Don't let them get you." Before he was dragged away screaming by security. My sister has been a psychiatric nurse for around 10 years or so and has told me all sorts of stories about her times. She is physically assaulted on an almost daily basis, has been threatened with everything you can imagine. People have thrown, smeared or ingested pretty much every bodily fluid available on the wards. She has just finished a degree retraining as a teacher because she no longer enjoys the profession. Was interviewing a guy in psych ward and he was complaining about how he couldn't have any whiteout, a liquid eraser for typewriters. Bekassu, he was on suicide watch. Claimed it was stupid Bekassu if he wanted to kill himself. As he pointed out, he could use the drawstring from the blinds to hang himself, or he could use his pencil to stab himself or use a typewriter metal bar to off himself. I agreed it was silly to hold back the small bottle of liquid whiteout. When I relayed the convo to my instructor about how silly it seemed due to him having several other ways, she replied that he proved to me that he had been considering ways to kill himself, and that's why he was able to come up with so many so quickly. He never did get his whiteout. I'm not a nurse but was a patient once. Giant dude got upset. One dude changed the channel from a football game he was watching and smashed his skull with his fists. Not fully, but enough that when they brought him back a few days later he started seizing and had to be removed again. Didn't see him again. Also, there was one lady who was straight out of the movies. Walking around preaching the end of days loudly and sweating like crazy. Got assigned to child psych ward in a hospital where I worked. Easy gig, wear street clothes, not much to do but pass out meds and observe. 15-year-old black kid, overweight, is sitting beside me casually discussing his day when he jumps up, begins screaming like a banshee, flailing around, looks like a seizure on roids, and I'm befuddled as to how to control him or the situation when after a few minutes of twisting my nerves into a tight ball, he stops, sits back down, and begins talking casually again. Had one of his spells. Not sure if anyone has ever been that close to a raving maniac while he's having a fit, but it's disarming to say the least. Rip out their tongue. A student, I was studying and this guy began to freak out and carved out his intestines with bare hands. Never thought it was possible, but considering him being a former powerlifter, maybe it's possible. Guy was like 6'6" and has to be kept under constant supervision as he'd once tried to kill the compounder with food plates, then he was only given a paper plate and edible crockery. 60-something old woman would come out of her room every so often at night topless and holding out her saggy breasts saying in broken English, "My nipples, my nipples, please." For the children, 40-something woman would sneak the shower mat out of the bathroom to put under her bed because she was God, and we were stealing her power by electrocuting her vagina every night. The floor mat apparently stopped this from happening. A severely schizophrenic woman used to tell me that my name was the worst fairy tale lie that she ever wrote in the 2 Bibles for her daddy. When she was angry with me, she would yell at me and say, "Get out of here, fairy tale book. I wish I never wrote you." That same woman attacked some nursing students who were attempting to use tissues over lollipops to make ghost props for Halloween. She didn't seem to like this, and while trying to hit them was yelling, "You idiots, you can't make ghosts out of lollipops again." Same woman, but different group of nursing students brought in several pizzas for an end of semester party. The woman buying them stalked up and down the tables looking at the pizzas. Then out of nowhere she started throwing the pizza and yelling, "What's this supposed to be? Some kind of pizza test?" I'm a tech at a psych hospital, but I start nursing school in August, so I hope this counts. We had a very tall, heavy-set man who swung at a nurse and a fellow tech when they asked him to not stand naked in the door and flash the whole unit, so we put him in a hold and escorted him to the seclusion room. From there he tried to strangle himself with his underwear. He had them on his head like a bandana, so we opened the door and took those away. Then he peed all over the floor, did push-ups, and every time he came down he would slurp it up. Eventually he got bored of that and began writing on the wall in his pee, and then masturbated onto the door and said it would be better if he could fuck my dead corpse. Eventually his IMB 52 kicked in and he contacted for safety good behavior, so we opened the door again and he bit me on the hand and drew blood. From there I got permission to not be involved in the code and a peer swapped me out. I'm assaulted on a weekly basis and we aren't even an acute care facility. I'm very excited to go PRN in August. $15.38 per hour is not worth it. Not me, but a friend is a behavioral consultant for a psyche ward and once told me a story about a patient that casually approached another patient and proceeded to pin him against a wall and bite his eyelid off. There was this one person who elicited stories about vulnerable people so they could gawk at them. As a patient, the nurse took my details, while in the room a random quiet knocking could be heard. I was like, it's some old machine does some work in the other room. This nurse calmly writing my details and then starts screaming, "Mary, fucking stop, I can't let you out till the tests run." I was like, well, okay. As a former PCT who was swayed from the field after spending 3 months on the psych floors, I don't have any stories to share, but do have a past history of MH issues I've overcome. Reading these stories just makes me realize how insanely fucking lucky most of us are that our chemical firing doesn't go haywire, and the possibilities that exist for poor souls if it does. Life-shattering and so insanely sad. I feel blessed beyond measure that I've walked that razor's edge and managed to stay on the sane side this far. That line is so very thin and most of us are so unaware of it. I saw a crazy bipolar woman bring a man out of full catatonia with a blowjob. This was years ago, security wasn't as tight as these days. Somehow this extremely manic woman gets into this guy's room. Now the guy, let's call him Gary, has been full catatonic since we got him, couldn't care for himself at all, he would just stare all day long. Well, I guess she must have sucked the depression right out of the guy, because he was right as rain afterward. We found them at the end of the session. Nursing student here, also not my story, a friend of mine that is a nurse in a psychiatric hospital. Some context? Some of the patients were outside sitting in the benches and walking around, and she was walking with some old patient. There was a patient standing by a door, dude is like 200 kilograms, 450 ibs. Actual story. A skinny guy was smoking and just minding his own business when out of the blue he starts running and just spears the 200 kilograms guy into the door like a steel and glass door and then just walks out of there like he does nothing. Big dude got a broken skull, a dislocated shoulder, and some minor injuries. Skinny dude got nothing. I don't know what triggered the dude to throw himself at a dude 3/4 times larger than him. Note: English is not my native language, so sorry for grammar and spelling mistakes. Swallowed needles and put razor blades in her vagina. Did this on a weekly basis. I visited a prison for a warden job and went to see the constant surveillance guys. There was a fella there who had used a razor to slice his stomach open and started pulling chunks of himself out for fun. He also started using the hole, which wouldn't heal, as a hiding place. A towel was found stuffed in there which his body had started fusing to. Apparently he was quite nice, but the whole thing wasn't for me, and I didn't go ahead with applying. Not a nurse but a former patient on many occasions who helped out, since I am surprisingly stable, even if very weird and uncanny at times. And this one time a co-patient apparently came in with so many fleas, it's amazing. Turns out he didn't wash his hair for the last few months, so besides being oily and heck, it was also full of fleas. When asked for why he didn't wash the hair, he reasoned that he didn't want to drown the fleas. I mean, it is solid reasoning, but kinda stupid. Because you don't wanna have fleas. All of her personalities claimed they got better after the treatment. In their own, individual, distinct voices. Patently waiting for the nurses from my psych ward to respond. Not me, but my dad used to work in Armadale and J Ward, Australian insane asylum and prison for the criminally insane, respectively, in the 70s. He used to talk about sunny days in J Ward where they'd bring out all the inmates during a sunny day and they'd promptly line up and start jacking off. In Armadale they deal with the jacking off problem by strapping you into cotton mittens, but a lot of the inmates would chew a hole through them just to get a finger out to jack off with. His worst story was about a psychotic woman in Armadale. She had self-inflicted scars all over her face from scratching herself, self-imposed bite marks all over her body from trying to eat herself, and she had the nasty habit of chewing the inside of her mouth and spitting blood at your eyes and mouth, hoping you'd catch one of the myriad of diseases she carried. A friend told me about their friend that worked at a psych ward. Some guy degloved his own penis and got stitches. He then proceeded to rip the stitches and skin off again. This left me speechless. A guy degloved his own penis number twice. Not a nurse, pharmacist. Had one of our clozapine patients miss a monthly meeting to discuss their medication. Called around, found out she was in the ICU having eaten 2 of her own fingers, then visited her mother for coffee, still bleeding. Had a friend tell me of another patient, made a cut in his thigh and reopened it regularly until the whole thing was a scar tissue cavern, by some miracle avoiding infection. Started using his meat pocket to hold pens and coins and anything he could collect in his ward. Nobody knew until a paperclip pierced the side and he finally wound up with an infection that took him to ICU where they found his stash. Years ago, I was a student nurse doing my psych rotation in a Catholic facility. The nuns still wore habits and the building was like something out of the Dark Ages. I'll skip talking about the line of patients waiting to undergo EC treatment in the basement and instead tell you about Maggie. She was a tragic case. She had been on lithium for years and it really kept her psychotic episodes in check until reached toxic levels and could no longer take it. One hot summer afternoon, we heard this banshee screaming coming from Maggie's room. We rushed in there to see what was going on. Entering the room, we are greeted by a scene I will never forget. This late 70s woman is standing on the window ledge, naked as a jaybird, screaming through the window screens at the nuns in the courtyard, "You fucking penguins are going to burn in hell." The poor sisters are scrambling to and fro trying to get away from the ranting madwoman's viscous verbal assault as we were trying desperately to pull her off the grating. I knew then and there that I would never become a psych nurse. Not me, but as someone I knew was in a ward with a girl who wanted to be a vampire and drank blood from her own tampons. It's as atrocious as it sounds. She was around 16 and schizophrenic. Had a guy come in with pictures of families pasted on his feet because he wanted to be close to them. Had a guy get kicked out of his foster home because he kept fucking the dog. He completely weighed out during pet therapy. I had a patient named Moses that would wake up every morning, whip out his dick into his Cheerios, piss, then eat. When I was a student doing a placement in a max security unit, a serial rapist was getting meds, made a silly joke. The nurse said, "Oh, stop," that his response was, "I've heard that before."